Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Sarah Bessey. Sarah is the editor and contributor of the New York Times bestseller and international bestseller, A Rhythm of Prayer. She's also the author of the critically acclaimed and best-selling books, Miracles and Other Reasonable Things, Out of Sorts, Making Peace with an Evolving Faith, and Jesus Feminist. Her new book is Field Notes for the Wilderness, Practices for an Evolving Faith, and it releases on February 20th, the same day this interview will be released. She also writes the Field Notes newsletter, to which I encourage you to subscribe. Sarah was also a featured speaker at the Frederick Buechner and Writing for Your Life writers conferences that I led. And you can learn more about Sarah at sarahbessey.com. So Sarah, congratulations on all your amazing work, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, is there anything else that you'd like to tell people about yourself?
No, I think that kind of covers, pretty much most of it. To date, that is the only writing workshop I've ever done was yours, Brian. So that was
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and I don't have those anymore, so
I
we'll
know.
be able to do
That
another
was
one.
a
But
good time. You did. We had a lot of fun at those, didn't we?
uh, they were, for me, phenomenal experiences. I mean,
Yeah.
number one, because of all the great people who came to speak
Hmm.
and all the great people who came to see you speak, so that was just a real blessing for me.
Hmm.
So today we have a couple things we want to discuss. One is the new book that I mentioned, and the second is talking with Sarah about finding your next calling, kind of advice and how she went about that. So anyway, before we get into the new book, though, can you give folks just an overview of the previous books that I mentioned?
Sure. So I guess maybe I'll start at the beginning. So Jesus Feminist was my first book. It came out in 2013. And it was kind of a look at maybe some of the narratives and stories we've been told about women and women's roles and stories and experiences, both in scripture, but then in the church. And yeah, it was a real joy to write. And I still am enjoying shepherding that 10 years later. And then Out of Sorts, Making Peace with an Evolving Faith was kind of written in the aftermath of Jesus Feminist because I alluded to some of the experiences that I'd had years before about struggles with church and places of growth and change and evolution in terms of my faith. And a lot of people kind of came back and were like, hey, yeah, we need to talk more about that. And so it was kind of my chance to kind of share a little bit about my own process. It was, a little bit of where I've landed, but a little bit of memoir as well. And, exploring some theology and some ideas behind those notions. And then Miracles and Other Reasonable Things is pretty much the only straight memoir I've done.
Mhm.
And I wrote that in the aftermath of a car accident and just some learnings and some experiences that I had around kind of resetting your life and finding God on the other side of unanswered prayers and, kind of grappling maybe with some of the, maybe even, I guess maybe at this point, it maybe is a bit of a deconstruction look because it kind of looked at some of the things I'd been taught and told about those very things like miracles and grappling with those. And then Rhythm of Prayer is the book that came out during the pandemic in 2021. And it was a book that's a collaborative one, which was a first for me. So I was not just writing for the book, but also serving as editor and then gathered up just a tremendous group of women who all contributed prayers or essays or reflections around the idea and the kind of theme that you can bring your whole self to prayer. That there's nothing that you need to kind of edit out or perform piety for God. And so that ended up being like a really beautiful experience to create. It was my first time doing it with people. But then also, yeah, it ended up really connecting with a lot of folks, which was really gratifying, I think. And then, yeah, that kind of leads us up to today, I guess.
Well, those books were really well received, and I think it really hit a nerve with people. I mean, it resonated really well with a lot of
Hmm.
folks, and now without some degree of controversy, right? I mean,
Who,
with
me?
some of them, which doesn't hurt, I guess.
No. I mean, there's definitely has been, moments like that along the way. I think most writers or most creators or most people or most artists, anyone who's kind of making things and putting them out in the world, you kind of do have to develop a bit of a thick skin to it, and learn to discern the difference between like healthy, good, necessary, important critique. And then, just like you said, more just, controversy or,
Mhm.
that sort of thing.
Never a dull moment, right? When you're out there.
Never, never, never. Being a
So let's,
woman on the internet who dares to have an opinion is never dull.
yeah, really. I can believe that. So let's get into the new book. As I mentioned, the title is Field Notes for the Wilderness, Practices for an Evolving Faith. So how did that book come about?
Well, that book, what I feel like now at this point, now that it's coming out, I've had the realization that I think I was working on it for more than 10 years
Hmm.
without really being aware of it. So one of the things that actually happened in the aftermath of publishing Out of Sorts was the creation of a community and a conference called Evolving Faith with a good friend of mine, Rachel Held Evans, whom I know you knew.
Sure.
And Rachel and I had both published books that were we were always kind of publishing alongside of each other, which was really special and a really fun experience, and it made it feel a little bit less lonely. But we had both written books kind of in a similar lane, where I'd written Out of Sorts and she had written Searching for Sunday, which is an incredible book.
Yes.
And we kind of had this thought, maybe we'll just put together, kind of a weekend conference or a retreat or something. And that first one just connected so much with so many people that we just decided to kind of keep it going. And so even in the aftermath of losing Rachel, within a year of that first gathering, Jeff too came alongside. A lot of other folks, came alongside of that work. And so in those years, I think of walking beside folks who were experiencing faith deconstruction or a faith shift, I began to kind of think, well, maybe there's a need for a book like this, as important and good and necessary and freeing even as I have found memoirs in that lane. The idea of being able to blend memoir with practices was really appealing to me. The idea of, like, if you were sitting down with someone who was kind of right at that threshold or right at the beginning of that experience, maybe what are the things I wished I would have known? Or what are the ditches that I fell into? What are the things that I can kind of point out or be a good guide for? And so, yeah, so over all those years of writing and all those years of leading Evolving Faith and, all the different things that we've all kind of collectively walked through, I began to realize that, hey, you know what, there's some things here that I think would actually maybe be actually helpful. That was kind of where it started.
Well, I mean, all that makes a huge amount of sense. And in the book, as the title indicates, you talk about wilderness quite a bit.
Mhm.
It's an important
Yeah.
concept. And you mentioned that you deal with this from the standpoint of what has served you in the wilderness, as opposed
Mhm.
to telling people this is a how-to book or, anything like that, which I thought was a really great way to be able to, as you said, accompany people who maybe are going through some of the same things that you had gone through.
Right.
Is that kind of the gist of what you mean by, served you through the wilderness?
I think so. I think one of the things that I've learned, or maybe one of the things that I found really difficult sometimes, was the 7 steps to such and such end, right? Or like the idea that there's a formula to
Yeah.
crack about God, or a way to control outcomes, right, in your life. And so if you've lived even longer than like a hot second, you know that that's not a thing that we're actually promised or that we actually get to enjoy. And so I think that that's kind of where it ended up starting, was to say, no matter where you kind of came from, and even to have a lot of room for the openness of where you may go, right? It may look very different than where I've landed. And it's less about even the answers or the conclusions, theologically or otherwise, as much as what's your posture as you're going to walk through this season of a dark night of the soul, or these moments of feeling like God has disappeared, or your belonging has disappeared. When you have a lot of those questions and those wonderings, and you're starting to think, well, but what about? Or the things they taught me in church are not the things I'm seeing now, and just whatever else is kind of happening around us. And so, yeah, I think that was kind of my thing, is just to say, here's the things that served me really well, that here are the places where I know I overcorrected and I missed some things. And if I can spare you that, I'd really love to. And then even on the other side, here's some beautiful things, right? I think maybe it was even a little bit informed by where we are because we just live right next door to the Rocky Mountains. And so we spend a lot of time outside and we always have like field guides around. And oftentimes they're very like informal, like they're not the, do this, do this, do this kind of thing, as much as it is like, here's some paths and here's things to watch out for. But also like, here's something beautiful. We want to make sure you don't miss. And it's worth going out of your way for this thing, or whatever else. And that's kind of even maybe the posture I brought into it was saying, okay, if someone is embarking on the wilderness, which was a metaphor that Rachel and I adopted really early in Evolving Faith, we were like, I love this metaphor for what we're trying to do here. And even looking at Evolving Faith itself, and even as this book now, as an extension of like a little feast in the middle of your journey. It won't be maybe necessarily where you land forever, but this is a good respite spot where you'll connect with people. You'll be, maybe filled up again for whatever lies ahead. And so that idea of being able to say, you know what, I'm just going to tuck this in your back pocket and you go ahead and take it with you as you go. And these are things that I hope will help you, but you'll build your own as well. You'll build your own practices. You'll learn your own things about what needs to be left behind and what's worth bringing along.
Very cool. In the book, there are several, I think, what you call principles, to live by. Would you like to share a couple of those with us?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely can. I mean, it was kind of an interesting thing to go back over a lot of things and be like, what's the themes that you begin to notice in your own work, which is sometimes, I mean, I don't know how other writers work, but I wish I enjoyed that level of like forethought because oftentimes I find the thread later, like after post first draft, right? You can go back and kind of find some of those themes again and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what I was doing here. But some of those themes that kind of emerged for me, I think probably the one that maybe undergirds the book more than any other is the reminder that you can't wander away from God's love. To just try to dispel some of the fear that people experience when they're undergoing deconstruction or a faith shift. And oftentimes I think that fear is not, like, I don't think you need to feel bad about it. I think it's oftentimes a very healthy and normal response to, what we are experiencing, but also what the ramifications for what we know it will mean in our lives. But what does it mean to still live within and kind of have your home base be within the love of God, no matter where you go or what changes? So that's one of those, maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily a principle as much as it is like maybe a foundation, but it does show up in there. And there's other ones too around like, the importance I've found of cultivating hope on purpose, the importance of telling the truth and learning how to lament, which was a big one for me personally, along with peacemaking. Those are the two that I still to this day, have to like consciously practice. I think maybe because I come from a religious tradition, like the prosperity gospel, word of faith movements that really highly valued, like, I don't know, not that. So the idea of like learning how to lament and tell the truth and repent and, have room for those sorts of things. I think like even like peacemaking. I think another one that I really love in the book that really permeates a lot of what we do at Evolving Faith even is the idea of not just naming what you're against, but being willing to interrogate or maybe not interrogate, but be curious about and lean into what you want to be for in the world, right? To just keep pressing through the importance of yes, I'm against this, but what is it that I want my life to be for? And what does it mean to live into that with a sense of intention even? And then even there's ones in there that like are a little bit cheeky for me, but I really wanted because like, I don't know if we talk enough about the joy. And so even having a chapter in there about like, yeah, you know what? You have permission to be happy. You have permission for the joy and the goodness waiting on the other side of this. It's not all loss and, reorganizing your whole interior world and exterior world to match that. There's actually a lot of joy and fun and goodness and expansion, to these kinds of experiences too. So there's a few.
So one of the things I really liked about it too, it was that, you sought wisdom from other people, other authors, right? And, I happen to love many of the authors that you quote from and obviously read from, Frederick Buechner, Barbara Brown Taylor, Brian McLaren, Parker Palmer, and of course, the late Rachel Held Evans. And as you mentioned earlier, you and Rachel were pretty close, and worked on evolving faith together for some time. But unfortunately, very, very, very unfortunately, she's no longer with us. So, can you talk a little bit about what your friendship meant, and then how you've been able to deal with that loss?
Sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like sometimes I lack the words to really express it. I know that a lot of people have walked through sudden and tragic losses like this. Um, and I think that I'll probably be processing it for a really long time. I know how missed she is in her real actual life, like with her real actual people. And and she is desperately missed in that capacity. And then there's also this capacity of how she led and shepherded and was a companion to so many of us.
Hmm.
And so that loss as well is huge. And I think that looking back in a generation or two, even longer, I think she will be the voice that people will look on and say, this was something remarkable and something really special. That she will be someone who really does emerge as the voice of a generation of people
Yeah.
who were really grappling with faith and grappling with the public, um, I don't know, like participation or embodiment maybe of what that is. And so, yeah, I mean, there's the big stuff I miss about her work and about her writing and about her presence in the world. Um, and then there's just the particularity of her that I think I'll miss always.
Yeah, yeah. I'm terrible at trying to describe that kind of stuff in words. So it's just,
It is. It does feel inadequate always.
hmm.
And yet underneath all of it, I had this moment at the first Evolving Faith when I was like sitting on stage and she was preaching. Because we had like I don't know, like the way it was set up was like, a few people were sitting in a couch like behind you while you were sharing, and then you would kind of have this conversation after and that sort of thing. And I remember like, first of all, she could really preach. She was really, really good. But I had this moment of just feeling like so lucky to do good work like this with a good sister like her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I will miss that until the day I die.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So the evolving faith really has become a great community,
Mhm.
on multiple levels, right? I mean, there is a great newsletter that you publish, and the conferences. Is there going to be another conference this fall?
Well, we're definitely talking about it right now. We were kind of going to catch our breath for a minute, but we still have, I think one of the things that I'm really proud about with the Evolving Faith, or one of the things that maybe was born out of the people who came, was the online community, because that can go all year round in a way that like a one and done
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
conference
yeah.
doesn't. And I mean, that was one of the things that Rachel and I really, really wanted to see happen. I think because both of us had been through those seasons and knew how lonely they were, and the idea of just having like even something and a few people who understood what you meant or were reading the books you were reading or were learning the things that you were learning that you could talk about those things with. And so, yeah, I mean, we're trying to decide what to do next with the conference. I think a lot of things have kind of reset lately, but the community is still thriving and still doing awesome.
Well, to have that online community through the pandemic, number one, and
Hmm.
then number two, it's geographically independent of a specific location where a conference is,
Yeah.
which is just huge, right? I mean, I know in all the work I've been doing, being able to have strong relationships with people that live 1,000 miles away. I mean, just like you and I, right? I mean, I'm in New Jersey and you're in Alberta. I mean, it's like not exactly close, neighbors
I know. It's like the
geographically, but it's
Jetsons
like
for us.
that doesn't, prevent us from collaborating. And I know for me, that's just been an incredibly powerful thing. And I think you
Hmm.
all have really leveraged that well in the
Hmm.
evolving faith community.
Well, we're definitely trying. That's for sure.
So I wanted to mention also that your book comes with a companion guided journal. Could you
Yeah.
mention that? Tell us more about
Yeah, sure. So that's actually my first time doing one of those, Brian. Like I've
that?
never done them before. And so when we kind of pitched it, originally I kind of had it folded into almost the book, but it became such a big thing that it kind of got separated out. Um, which is maybe a hat tip to how much I overwrite books. But but there was this, yeah, I really loved the practices of it. And so it was one of those things where it let me do what I think I really believed in for the book, which was give room for people to recontextualize it for their own lives and their own stories. You know, that whether you treat it like a journal and you like write in it, or you use it for a discussion guide with a small group, or you use it as prompts for, conversations with friends or whatever else. It just gives the opportunity to kind of like go a little bit deeper and get curious about your own story and develop some of those, insights or possibilities for your own self, and even honor maybe where you were as well as where you're going. And so it ended up by the end being one of my favorite things I've ever done, even though I didn't really know I was doing it until we kind of got through it, if that makes sense.
Wow,
Yeah,
cool, cool. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the whole idea of finding your next calling.
sure.
Um, you have now been an author for several years, which means basically that you're a solopreneur, a single person entrepreneur, whether you really intended it for that or
Yeah.
really not, right?
Oops.
Most many authors don't, right? So let's go back to when you started. What drove you to go off on your own, and start writing books?
Well, it's interesting. I worked for 12 years in marketing and financial services, as well as in nonprofit development, and then kind of pivoted into like strategic planning. And was always had wanted to be a writer and had always been writing. And I was one of those people who started a blog in the early aughts,
Mm, mm,
right? And I mean, it ended up being a very auspicious thing without a lot of planning or really understanding of it, I think, because again, it was new media. It was like kind
um,
of a new thing to do. And I think I wrote my blog for like 6 or 7 years before anyone paid attention to it, Brian. Like, and I look back on those years now with so much gratitude because I was working full time, having my kids. I was blogging on my lunch break, during nap time when I was on mat leave, with my kids. And it gave me an opportunity to explore with low stakes. It let me really develop my voice. It helped me really understand who I was writing for and why. It let me make mistakes
mm.
without there being like a swift, massive amount of punishment. Like it ended up being like a really good thing. And then that ended up opening the doors to a lot of relationships. And I didn't think that traditional publishing was really open to someone like me. Around that time, there wasn't really the openness maybe
Yeah,
that we've seen lately,
absolutely.
although there's still a long ways to go and we both know that. And so the blog was what ended up getting the attention of more traditional publishing. And so I was part of that big class of bloggers like Rachel. And there were a whole bunch of us that kind of got signed to traditional publishers in the late 2000s, around that 2009, 2011 kind of time. And they haven't been able to get rid of me really since. But it wasn't until I'd written my first book that I left my actual day job.
Okay.
Like, and I think I'm someone who tends not to be an entrepreneur. Like, I'm not someone who's like yourself, like you're always coming up with, ideas and possibilities and opportunities for connection and things. That was not my story at all. And so having the room to develop relationships and friendships and community before I took that leap was actually really helpful for me.
Mm.
And then, yeah, then it was just kind of, that's been life now for more than 12 years. And so it's kind of funny to look back on that I've been doing this for just as long as I was doing like my
Ah,
regular day job.
cool.
And I wouldn't have necessarily ever imagined that.
So what advice do you have for someone who's just getting started now? The world's changed a little bit, right?
The world has changed a lot, and traditional publishing has changed a lot. I think even the opportunities and the connections, like back when I first started, even blogging, there wasn't the social media and stuff that there is now.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the thing that makes me really excited about the opportunities right now is that how little you need to be gatekept,
Hmm.
right? Like there's something really beautiful about being able to develop and speak directly to the people who want to connect
Yeah.
with your work, whether it's through a newsletter on Substack or it's through TikTok or it's through, your own stuff that you're publishing or connecting with other writers for. And so the opportunities can sometimes feel overwhelming because there's so many of them now, so many different ways that you can kind of do that. But I think a couple of things I think that stand or maybe hold since then, although I might be a dinosaur for most people, but there is this sense of like doing it, like not hoarding your writing, not hanging on to it for someday, but just beginning to develop and put your writing out there, writing every day, connecting with people, having that sort of thing was really great. And then I think the other thing that really has helped me and served me really well, and not just from a professional standpoint, but from a like being a person standpoint, has been the relationship building.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
not look at it as, a platform building, which can be a bit soul sucking, as important as it is, I know, to publishers. It's been important for me that it feel authentic and that it doesn't feel like a grift or like a code I'm trying to crack, but instead is really born in actually caring about people and relationships and connecting with those and cheering each other on and not having that kind of scarcity mindset with other writers, but instead having one of abundance and cooperation. And yeah, I think that's something that Rachel taught me. She was always really, really generous in ways that I don't know anyone outside maybe of the business would understand how much heavy lifting she did on behalf of new and emerging
Oh
and
yeah, she
marginalized
absolutely did.
authors.
She
And
absolutely shared her
so
platform.
that was a huge roadmap for me to follow.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I mean, um, with all the work that I do with authors, I tell everyone, the same thing that you're saying about how valuable it is to collaborate and cooperate with other authors that are kind of in your space, roughly speaking.
Yeah,
Where I grew up in high tech, I mean, it was a very competitive thing. You'd never think about, you know,
exactly.
cooperating with one of your competitors. This is a completely
Well,
different
and
world
authors, we
because,
can tend to be a little fragile and well, I mean, I know I can be, and so there's can be this sense of like almost protectionism, like somehow you have to guard, things. And I think being able to push back on that narrative is actually really important. So yeah, I don't think you're wrong, right?
well, I mean, if someone's, likely to buy your book, they're likely to also buy, another person who's writing similar kinds of books. It's not an
Hmm.
either or, it's an and. And
Hmm.
so if, their followers can find out about your work and your followers can find out about their work, I mean, it's just a natural, win-win.
Well, exactly. And I think especially when you find yourself in spaces like ours, where oftentimes people find us and they are lonely. Um, Oftentimes they are learning things or experiencing things that they feel maybe kind of puts them at odds with their, community or with their family of origin or whatever else. To realize they're not as alone as they thought, that's a huge thing, right? To all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm not alone out here in the wilderness. There's actually a lot of us. And look at even all the options now. Like I look back on how lonely I felt in those first early stages, 25 years ago when I was having my first experiences with what I now would call deconstruction. At the time, I didn't have language like that. Um, or writing similarly. And then all of a sudden to be like, oh no, there's thoughtful, good people who are out here and they're doing this too. And I don't have to do it all by myself and I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And also I don't have to be lonely and like in my own head all the time. This is great. Who knew?
So let's talk about discernment a little bit. Given all you've learned and all you've, gone through, when you think about, okay, what's next? Are there particular processes or people or, other kind of resources that you look to help in your discernment?
Hmm, that's a good question. Yeah, I think discernment is kind of one of those things that do end up becoming a lot more important to us than we maybe expect it to. Like it sounds like such a nice, like almost churchy word, and it ends up being like your crossroad map,
Yeah.
right? When you come to those moments of like, now which way do I go? And so I come from like the charismatic church.
Hmm.
And so I'm always like my answers always are going to lean very heavily on the spirit. Right. And that's something that where I feel comfortable. Like I feel like that's something that, to me is connected with not only like with prayer and with spiritual discernment, but, in scripture and whatever else, but also in my conversations with other people who know me and are invested in my life and understand, even the deeper values that drive a lot of those things. And then I think that's one of the things where I've been really grateful for the generation of folks who are maybe just a little bit ahead of the path on up from me, to be able to look at them and say, what were the things that they did? What were the choices that they made that maybe wouldn't have connected as much, to something? Because sometimes as a writer, you make decisions that are more aligned with your values than with like the brand, right? Or what, publishing houses and numbers and things would want you to do. And so I think that's where some of that cooperative nature
Mm.
and that sense of like paying attention to our elders and paying attention to the people who are, alongside of us, the people who have been trustworthy guides in other areas of life, I think also end up being a pretty trustworthy voice when we're trying to discern those sorts of things. And one of the things I think that has actually proven to be really important to me in ways that I maybe wouldn't have expected before, is the importance of learning to also just trust my own instincts
Mm.
and trust my own knowing. I think I know for a lot of women who came up in, particular churches or traditional teachings or whatever else, there can almost be this sense of like distrusting yourself
Mm.
or
Mm.
distrusting your own gut, like too many sermons about how the heart is, evil and wicked and blah, blah, blah. And so starting to see yourself as like a good, sturdy, trustworthy partner and paying attention to your own instincts, your own gut feeling, your own body, your own knowing, letting yourself know what you know. Those are things that have also proven to be really helpful.
Well, I'm glad to hear a couple of different things that you said. One, when I read up on discernment and things like that, a lot of people can gain quite a bit from meditation, things like that.
Mhm.
I'm not one of them. I mean, all the ideas
Good for you, not for me.
for news. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I respect that. I mean, I'm really glad people can
Yeah.
get a lot out of that. I've found so much more benefit in talking with other people,
Mhm.
and
There could
bouncing
be a
ideas.
communal sense to discernment. It's not all internal. It can be
Right.
communal. Yeah.
Yeah. That's been, I think, how God's spoken to me the most is through other people. Um, so I really like, that aspect of what you were saying. And also, what you were alluding to of judgment. You've developed now a sense of judgment that
Mhm.
was honed by all the things that you went through, all the learnings that you had, the years of, seeing all kinds of different situations has helped you develop and have confidence in your own
Mhm.
judgment. And, I think those are really powerful attributes,
Yeah, I think so.
judgment
I
and
think they
here.
do end up serving us pretty well. I mean, like even I can look back on and say maybe even the creation of evolving faith was a communal discernment
Hmm. Hmm.
experience because I'm not someone who would have done something like that on my own. I'm not someone you would have picked out of a lineup to be doing anything like that. And yet when everybody around you is saying, hey, this is a thing that's not only necessary, but we think it's good and you can be a part of it, even discerning that in cooperation with other people was really good and important. And then two, of course, be able to do it with people, to not feel like you had to be like
Hmm. Hmm.
the only leader out there doing it and like, the person at the top of the thing. And it's just like, no, like let's do it collaboratively and
Yeah.
cooperatively. And I think it can be actually really lovely.
Well, you guys focused on bringing in lots of great people to speak,
Yeah.
which is what I tried to do that with all the work that I do. And found that to be
We're
incredibly
spoiled for it. There's so
valid.
many good ones.
So I know you're in the middle of a book launch, but I have to ask you kind of like what's on the horizon, whether it's books or other projects or anything that you want to talk about in terms of future trajectory.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, we're kind of in a season of discernment right now with evolving faith gatherings and conferences. So I'm really excited to see what's going to be revealed through that process. It's been a lot of fun to dream again instead of just kind of replicating the same thing every year. So that's actually been really energizing. So there's that. And then from a writing perspective, I'm probably going to be working on a new book in the aftermath of this. I think once I get my breath back on the other side of launch. And just leaning into some of those same themes and some of those same ideas and just kind of continue to keep exploring. I think that was one of the things that I've always really loved is how it almost feels like following like a trail of breadcrumbs. Like I feel like I can almost trace at this point, like every book has led me to the next book. And so I'm kind of interested to see more what unfolds here on the other side of this.
Good,
But like
good.
I said, I got to get my feet under me first.
Sure, sure. One step at a
This
time.
one out. Yeah,
It's too easy for me to focus on the shiny, bright object out there somewhere else instead of, okay, got to get this done first. But
right. Next.
well, Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to reconnect with you and to, hear about what you've been up to, all the wonderful things that you've accomplished, and I'm so excited to watch for more and follow, where you're going to be headed next.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. I always appreciate your generosity and support and encouragement over the years, and it's so good to see your face again.
Oh, same here. So again, Sarah's new book, Field Notes for the Wilderness, Practices for Evolving Faith. You can
Mhm.
learn more about all of Sarah's work at sarahbessey.com. Again, thank you so much, Sarah, and wish you all the best.
Thanks so much. Take care.